You have established in this book that human beings have been drinking for a very long time and for very deep social purposes. How did it start?
So I was told, and I think most of us are told, that alcohol, to the extent we think about the beginning of alcohol, we think of it as a kind of byproduct or accidental discovery after we had agriculture. The way I thought of it was we got agriculture, we started growing grains, we started making bread, and then one day someone leaves their sourdough starter out for too long and it starts to ferment, and they drink it and think, oh, that's kind of interesting, and we have beer. So in that story, alcohol was kind of an afterthought to civilization. What really surprised me was the archaeological evidence suggests it's the other way around. So hunter-gatherers were gathering together in big groups to have festivals, to do rituals at these really impressive ritual sites with these massive stone pillars, kind of like mini stone hedges, and drinking. They were drinking some substance or huge vats along with the remains of the feast that they were eating. Maybe those vats contain water. I really doubt it. We know people were making beer at this point in the Fertile Crescent, and probably hallucinogen-laced beer. So they were gathering and getting intoxicated a couple thousand years before we had agriculture. And so the story now, this is the so-called beer before bread hypothesis, is that it's actually the drive to get intoxicated that motivated people to settle down and start trying to make alcohol in a serious way. And then we got bread. So we actually settled down to make beer, and then we discovered, well, you could also make this thing to eat the next morning, soak up the alcohol. So that surprised me. And in this sense, in a very direct way, our drive to get intoxicated is what caused us to create civilization, because agriculture is the basis of civilization. And then once we got into civilization, it gave us a tool for helping us to cope with all the challenges of living in civilized societies.
So you talk a lot about alcohol and trust between human beings. Give us a sense of how that works.
Well, in the same way that when we meet, we shake hands, right? We shake right hands. I'm showing you that I'm not carrying a weapon. And now we can sit down and I can't harm you. I'm disarmed. If you sit down with someone and you do a couple shots of baijiu, the sort of liquor that is used at Chinese banquets, you're doing the same thing cognitively. You're taking out your prefrontal cortex and putting it on the table and saying, I am cognitively disarmed. I am less able to lie. I'm less able to cheat. And I'm more likely to like you. I've become more open cognitively to you. And that's an appealing thing.
So we have some societies, of course, around the world that have done everything they can to ban alcohol. What do you think the impact of that is in terms of social interactions, business structure, politics? What does it mean for a society when they do that?
They've eliminated a crucial tool for getting people to cooperate. The subcultures that don't have alcohol substitute something else that does the same thing. So they substitute another chemical intoxicant. So in the Pacific, cultures that don't have alcohol use kava, which is this tuber-based intoxicant that has similar effects. Cultures that ban chemical intoxicants entirely have to be either replacing it with something else or just suffering the consequences of having trouble getting people past cooperation dilemmas. If we're doing drinks together, suddenly you look a lot more handsome and charming. I feel more handsome and charming. It helps people get cooperation off the ground, especially in situations where cooperation is challenging. And so how cultures do that when they've banned alcohol and other chemical intoxicants is something I don't know. Maybe there's substitute practices you could throw in, but there's a good reason that it's rare for cultures to do that.
We certainly have seen international summitry, they get together, dinners, they've got drinks. Not everybody does, of course. Donald Trump, for example, just doesn't drink, period.
Yeah, I would predict people are going to trust him less. What alcohol is doing is paralyzing the part of your brain that's in charge of rational self-interest. So the prefrontal cortex is how you calculate cost benefits. It's how you suppress instincts. It's how you delay gratification for long-term payoffs. When you turn that down a bit, you start to let your emotions take over. You start to see commonalities rather than just pursuing your own interest. So I'd have to predict that leaders who don't drink are going to have trouble doing that. And maybe one of the reasons they do it is because they get an advantage. I mean, if other people are cognitively disarming and you're not, you may be able to pursue your self-interest in a way that could be harmful to other people. I document the fact that across cultures and throughout history, people have been suspicious of people who don't drink. People have been suspicious of the one who remains sober when everyone else is getting drunk. Now, as I think is the case with Trump, and I think Joe Biden as well, alcoholism in his family. And so he avoids drinking because he's seen the incredible costs of alcoholism. Maybe the person who's not drinking is pregnant, or they have to get up early and take the kids to daycare. So this is a problem. All the positive aspects of alcohol-based sociality have a dark side. And so when people are bonding over alcohol, they can do things that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. They can reach agreements. They can trust each other in a way they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. But then people who aren't joining in that practice can get frozen out. And that creates some inequity. And that's what I think organizations have to figure out, is how you deal with that. How do you get the benefits of alcohol-based sociality while mitigating the inequities that it creates?
Yeah, we talk about, in corporate organizations, of course, a lot of this is around bro culture. To the extent that there's drinking going on after hours in organizations, it's caused all sorts of mistreatment, usually gender-based. And so, our society is moving as far away from that as possible. How much of gender inequity has actually been fostered by the fact that alcohol is a significant piece of letting down your cognitive guard?
Yeah, I think quite a bit, and it's a problem. And I think people are rightly concerned about it. So for instance, I'm an academic. When we go to conferences, academic conferences, in-person conferences, we go in person, and we go in person because a lot of the real work is done outside of the formal sessions. A lot of this happens at the conference bar, after hours. And it's great in some ways. It's allowing a type of sociality to happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. The problem is it's all dudes, and women are quite understandably reluctant to enter these bro culture, especially late night gatherings. And as a result, they're getting frozen out of this. It's a big problem. I think the response to this by most organizations has been overkill. So the response has been, well, let's just make everything dry. You're not allowed to have these events anymore, or if you have them, you can't have alcohol at them. And I think that's because we don't see the functional benefits of alcohol. We look at alcohol just as kind of a public health problem. And at most on the positive side is fun. So if I'm head of HR and I see on one side potential lawsuits, sexual harassment, sexual assault, drunk driving, all these bad things, plus damage to people's livers, all this possible alcoholism, that's all on one side. On the other side, what is there? Fun. When you put it that way, fun is always going to lose. So what I'm trying to do in Drunk is point out that on the other side is not just fun. It's functional benefits. It's enhanced creativity. So we haven't talked about that, but one of the things alcohol does is free your mind up. You can start to think in a lateral way more easily and share your ideas with others in a freer way. So it's a crucial element, I think, in group creativity. You lose that as well. Now, you may see all those benefits and still say, yeah, we still don't want you guys drinking around the hotel bar late at night. We still don't want to have alcohol at our annual holiday party. And that's a perfectly justified decision, but it has to be made with all of the data. And I think right now, when it comes to making decisions about alcohol, whether to include it in our personal lives, whether to include it in our professional lives, we've been flying blind from an anthropological and from a scientific perspective. So I'm just trying to correct that and at least get all the data out there for decision makers. And then they can decide for their own organization, or you can decide as an individual yourself the extent to which you want to use alcohol in your life.
I just wonder to what extent we can really say that the impact of alcohol is so similar, so homogeneous on people when they take it. Just from a pop culture perspective, you've got the angry drunk.
Angry drunks are just angry people who are finally getting to show their anger. What alcohol is doing is disinhibiting you. It's not creating new personality traits. It's not making you a different type of person. What it's doing is impairing your ability to conceal or repress what type of person you are. Kind of ugliness that can come out at a certain point of inebriation is you seeing what people really think or what they really feel. So I do think there's a lot of work that can be done. The last part of the book is about all the dangers of alcohol, and there are a lot of dangers. Historically, we've been drinking relatively weak beers and wines. So most cultures are drinking like 2 to 3% beer-like substances. Relatively recently, so last few hundred years, we've had access to distilled liquors, which are just wildly more powerful than the stuff we've had access to in the past. The other problem is we're drinking more alone. So again, historically, it's always been the case that drinking was a social act. It's something you did usually in a actually very tightly controlled ritual environment. And you didn't have private access to alcohol. The only time you had access to alcohol was in a public event where someone was timing the drinking. They were making toasts, they were passing around something. Everything was regulated. Other people were watching you. The tendency humans have to overindulge in something that makes us feel good, that hits our pleasure centers in our brain, was controlled and moderated by this ritual support. When you can go to a drive-through liquor store and load your SUV up with a couple cases of vodka and some firearms and Twinkies and drive home to your house in the suburbs and just have all that sitting around, that's historically unprecedented. So I think that I call this the problems of distillation and isolation. These two relatively new features of modernity have made alcohol a lot more dangerous. I think the pandemic has shown that when you make this really extreme, when people can't even go out and drink in a pub or a cafe, drinking gets really unhealthy and dangerous. Different cultures have healthier and less healthy attitudes and practices around alcohol. So-called Northern European cultures drink a lot of distilled spirits. They drink to get drunk. They kind of celebrate drunkenness. It's kind of manly to be really drunk. They tend to have really high levels of alcoholism and tend to not use alcohol in healthy ways. What anthropologists call Southern European cultures. So Italy is the one I'm most familiar with. They drink mostly wine and beers. It's always part of a meal. You're always doing it at the meal table, so for lunch or dinner. Kids get acculturated into it very early, so you give kids a little bit of wine that's watered down with their meal so they understand that it's just part of life. It's something people do. And public drunkenness is frowned upon. So if you're in Rome and you see some drunk people wandering around, they're tourists, they're not locals. So I think if you kind of figure out ways to emulate healthy drinking cultures, you're more likely to be able to get the benefits of alcohol and avoid all of at least most of the negative consequences.
Well, like so many things in life, the healthiest ways to approach a challenge are not the quick fixes. Ted Slingerland, the book is Drunk, and he's a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia. Ted, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.